record, this is the people of the state of Colorado versus James Egan Holmes, case number 12 CR 1522. The record should reflect that Mr. Holmes is present with his attorneys and the prosecutors are present as well. We are outside the presence of the jury. Are the parties ready for the jury? Okay, let's bring the jury in, please. Mr. Brockler, by my calculations, you have 25 minutes and 30 seconds for rebuttal. Oh, and for the record, the question that was submitted by the juror earlier, we will mark it as Court Trial Exhibit 87. The envelope related to D-TR-84, we will mark as Court Trial Exhibit 86. Right?
Yeah.
That's the envelope that we spoke about at the bench.
I believe you said 84, isn't it 94?
Oh, excuse, did I say 9? Okay, if I said 84, yes, that was wrong. It was D-TR-94. Thank you for correcting that. Please be seated, everyone. The record should reflect that the jury's back in the courtroom. Welcome back, folks. Mr. Brockler, do you have a rebuttal closing argument?
I do, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. About 45 minutes, I think that, oh my God, I'm not going for 45 minutes. It was about 45 minutes that I think I lost count of how many times my name was referenced as the reason why something had gone wrong in this case. We heard for another 45 minutes about why the defendant should be considered mentally ill. There was some other time discussing things that took place in November, an example of an MRI presentation that was never admitted that was published to you on up, and then in the last 5 minutes we heard how all of this means that the defendant did not know right from wrong when he walked into that theater to massacre all those people. It's hard to know where to begin. There's a lot of different moving pieces there. But what I want to start with is this. Every single thing that you were just asked to consider, every piece of it was considered by Drs. Metzner and Dr. Reed. There's no information that they did not have or make themselves aware of or make available to themselves before they rendered their opinion. And what's interesting is there are times when Dr. Reed's opinion is to be held out for you, when the defendant says something on video that is supportive. But when it's hurtful, or it's painful, or it supports the idea that he knew right from wrong, then we criticize him for when he did the interview and how he did the interview. And I guess what I'd like to do is to take the video of Dr. Reed and his interview style and compare it to that of Dr. Gurr. But we can't do that because she didn't do a video. All we know is that the doctor they rely upon for insanity is the one who misquoted, who mistranscribed, who didn't do much at all before that first opinion, and did it in such a way that on the stand here was able to say repeatedly, well, I just didn't document it. Of course, I passed it, and I did it, and I considered it, but I didn't document it. We never, ever had that issue with Dr. Metzner or Dr. Reed. And despite what's been presented on the screen to you as their bases for sanity, and they both say he is sane. You rely on your notes, and that's true for what I say too. Absolutely do not take what I tell you to the bank. Don't rely upon what I say. I'm just a guy up here making an argument about what I think the evidence is. You're the ones that took the notes. And either what I'm telling you rings true or it rings hollow, but that's up to you to make that decision. The first thing is, all this stuff, it isn't a surprise to Drs. Reed and Dr. Metzner. And they came back and said, this guy was sane when he pulled the trigger over 70 times into human beings. One of the things that was argued to you was this idea that things were illogical or they were irrational. Well, I want you to think about all the evidence in this case. Every decision, every plot, every plan that this guy hatched. But for wanting to murder human beings, but for that, where's the irrational decision? Where's the illogical decision? Every single decision he made was to move forward towards this horrendous, horrific, as he put it, evil goal. That's not disorganized. That's not disorganized in speech or in thought. None of it. The question was raised, well, it's so illogical that he went and saw Dr. Fenton. Why would he do that? He told you through the video of Dr. Reed, through Dr. Metzner, through all of his statements. Why did he go see Dr. Fenton? You know it. He wanted to rid himself of the anxiety, that social anxiety that had not only plagued him throughout his life, but has now manifested itself in his failures at presentations, his failures at lab work. And that's why when he tells Dr. Woodcock 4 days after the mass murder, you know what, the homicidal ideas, they didn't really bother me. He went to Margaret Roth looking for a fix. He went to see Dr. Fenton looking for a fix. And inside that notebook, he tells you it didn't work. But then he keeps going. And now we know why. Because when he talks to the other doctors, Dr. Metzner, he says, I couldn't just quit. It'd be too conspicuous. I'd already set my mind on killing these people. That's why he keeps going. And you know what that is? That's rational. Evil, but rational. What was the evidence that the defendant thought what he was doing was morally okay? I spent a good chunk of that opening, closing statement talking to you about every person in his life that he deceived to keep them from finding out what he was doing. And it wasn't because he knew it was illegal. Where is that singular act other than doing it that shows that he thought it was right? You know, we talked about a couple hypotheticals in here with some of these experts. Had this guy, after breaking up with his girlfriend or failure at the prelims, if he goes to a sporting goods store and he goes and he buys that AR-15, and he buys the magazines right there, doesn't try to spread out the purchases to avoid suspicion, buys the ammo right there, locks and loads, walks right across the street to the Century 16 Theater, walks right in, open and notorious to everyone around him, and open fire. We would all think that just isn't, that's not normal. Clearly that there's something wrong. And that guy would argue, well, I thought it was morally right for me to do this. Dr. Metzner, in fact, gave us the best example. He said, how is it that someone could think something was illegal and yet at the same time think it was morally okay? And he talked about a delusion where a guy believes that his neighbor is plotting to kill his family. Clearly not true. Clearly, factually, provably false. But he goes ahead and kills his neighbor because of that delusion, even though he knows it's illegal. There is nothing like that here. This guy's delusion, and it's been described by Dr. Gurr in so many different ways. I don't know how we can argue that it's consistent. I mean, is it because the end of the world, she's doing someone a favor, it's the inevitable catastrophe, increase his value? Here's what we know. This idea of this delusion having to be fixed and false, it is neither. How can you say that this guy doesn't value himself more today after murdering people? He does. That's what he said. That's not false. This isn't a guy who says, I think I get a gold bar in my bank account every time I shoot someone in the head in a theater. That's the kind of delusion that we could say, okay, that is provably false. This guy says what makes me like me more is homicide, is killing people. And we're told then, well, that's a value nobody agrees with, therefore it's delusional. But what it doesn't change is the fact that he knows, despite his wanting to do it, it is morally wrong. Mom and Dad don't get to know the truth. In fact, they sense nothing. Even after the call from Dr. Fenton, they're going to wait 2 months to come out because this doesn't seem so out of the ordinary. His girlfriend, the woman he loves, when she rebuffs him on this philosophy, he leaves. His friend leaves. What is the singular action other than him doing this horrible crime that says he thought it was morally okay? There's nothing. Every single thing we talked about in that open and close makes it clear. He knew everybody. Everybody. Mom and Dad, Gargi and Ben, neighbors, shop owners, the people in the theater. Everybody would view what he was doing as wrong, and not just because there's a statute about it, because it's morally wrong. Quick thing about malingering here. There's a ton of tests that they did, a ton of validity tests that they did, and they all told you the same thing, those people that did them. They measure his testing right then and there. The symptomology that he puts out right then and there. And that's fine. But you know what none of these tests were able to do for us? They're not able to explain to us this burgeoning memory of shadows, of these hallucinations. They start as a flicker, as fleeting, and you see them change with each mental health person he talks to. With Woodcock, it's, well, it started in undergrad. Then we hear, no, actually, it never happened before until my third rotation in graduate school. And it goes from flickering and then some beetle-like description all the way to, if you remember, from I think the third or fourth time Dr. Reed asked him, it became shadows that looked like people, and they were dancing. And then they were juggling. What were they juggling? They were juggling sword axes and sword guns. And all along, Dr. Reed keeps asking him, doesn't this concern you? And he seems to get the message from the question and then says, oh yeah, and yes, it did bother me, and they were juggling heads. And by the time Dr. Gurr comes back to interview him, and this is remarkable too, we're told that Dr. Reed's videotape interview of August of 2014 is suspect because of how much time has gone by. And yet Dr. Gurr, the bulk of her interviews, the bulk of her notes came after that. And she relied upon that to bolster her earlier June 2013 opinion. But by the time they get done, he's got all these differing shadow things going on. Now, I don't know if that's made up, but what I know is none of these malingering tests seem to be able to prevent it. A call for action. In June of 2013, he says it repeatedly to Dr. Gurr. In August of 2013, he denies saying it at all. Malingering tests don't seem to be able to catch that either. There is an image I want to show you from the notebook. And the notebook is interesting because what you have to ask yourself is, who is this really for? We know what Dr. Fenton, we know Dr. Fenton's role, right? He says, I sent it to her because I wanted her to know how to fix people like me in the future. If that were true, that would be an acknowledgement that what he was going to do was wrong, and he wanted to have her help stop someone from being wrong again in the future. Not legally, morally. But it's interesting that inside the notebook, he actually addresses it to Mom and Dad and his sister. And when he sends it, it's after he's posted, "Will you visit me in prison?" Now this notebook, is this the kind of thing that he thinks is going to stop with Dr. Fenton? He could have mailed it to Mom and Dad, but he doesn't. He could have left it in the apartment that he really didn't think was going to go up in flames, but he didn't. He mails it to Dr. Fenton. Any chance that there's some impression management going on in this thing? If you read this, this is far from disorganized. In fact, Dr. Ger, and remember, these are the negative symptoms, disorganization, and she described them. Sentences that just end. Made up words. Gibberish. Hard to move from one thing to the next. And yet in this, as with every other email and text and paper that he wrote from start to stop that year, there's not a whiff of it. Not a whiff. We're told, too, that catatonia is a sign of this advanced mental illness. And yet, there's not a whiff of it. None of it. Anywhere. And then that's dismissed. And we're told, sometimes this stuff, one of the notable things is people will stop taking care of themselves. Poor personal hygiene. Not any of it. Anywhere. But when you look at this, the way he lays this out on the second to the last page, not the penultimate page, but whatever that is called, that is the one before that. Can we make that show up there? Long after he has calculated the best way to kill people, long after he's gone through the theaters and talked about which is the best one, and he's waxed philosophical about things from the blind can see and the butterfly effect. And by the way, it's all philosophy in there. There's nothing disorganized about that. Right towards the end, he writes this: research firearms laws and mental illness. Why in the world, at the end of this notebook, would he make a note about researching firearms laws and mental illness? I don't know. Thank you. You can take that down. The difference between the experts here is a matter of expertise, effort, and corroboration. Dr. Woodcock made no effort to corroborate anything. That's why he only watched 30 minutes of the Dr. Reed video and reviewed very few records, because remember, he's very busy. Dr. Gurr, same thing. By the time she opined in 2013, she had documented reviewing nothing. But by the time she testified here, she'd reviewed everything. She just hadn't documented it. The issue with cross-examining Dr. Gurr is when someone doesn't document what they've done, or they misdocument quotes, or what's been said, it's hard to cross-examine them on that substance. It's like being in quicksand. So we end up having to talk about all the other issues related to why she didn't do a better job. You can see I'm zipping through here. One of the things that was said right at the end here by right at the end by defense was that this guy had no interest in doing this for any other reason. It had nothing to do with being remembered, and that there was no evidence of that. You will recall from Dr. Reed's interview of the defendant that being remembered was huge for him. In fact, in the notebook, Dr. Reed asks him, "You made a notebook that has to do with how you'd be remembered." And he wrote, "Right." He also, here we go, PowerPoint. Can I get that up there? Everything about this guy is self-centered and self-focused. It has nothing at all to do with any sort of mental illness. Gargi told you that. She said the most important person in the world to the defendant is the defendant. And you know where this sort of subtly showed up? Was in an interview with Dr. Reed where they talked about that Valentine's Day dinner. Do you remember that? And he made the chicken with the crunchy stuff on it and all that, because he liked it. And then he asked him, "Did you do candles?" And he goes, "I did candles." And he said, "Did you do candles because Gargi likes them?" And he said, "No, I did candles because I like them." That theme recurs everywhere. Read the texts. Read the notebook. This guy is absorbed with himself. He's desperate to be remembered, and he's desperate to be wanted. If it can't be by Gargi, he'll try Hillary. If it doesn't work with Hillary, he's flirting with her. No matter what Dr. Gurr says, come on. You don't go twice after the same girl about shorts and talk about how hot she is and not have interest in her. That's not social withdrawal. The selfies. Remember what he tells Dr. Reed? The black contact lenses that just happened to arrive the day of the shooting. And he starts to take these pictures. Dr. Gurr told us the pictures were to show how easy it was for him to accumulate weaponry. Well, we know that's not true. He says they'd look good to whoever viewed them, to Dr. Metzner. Reed asks him, you took selfies that had to do pretty specifically with how you'd be remembered. Right. I don't think people are going to remember me for any other reason. It's unusual to have dyed hair like that and contact lenses like that. More likely to remember something unusual than something mundane. I tested it first, wearing it all, put the slings off and on, and I looked at myself in the mirror, and there's the picture he took. It's important to me to be remembered. Is it important for me to be remembered? I'd say yes. And thus the New York Times, from his phone, never ends up doing it, but this is where his head is. Someone needs to see what I've been able to pull off. I put it in the notebook and mailed that, but they got to see these pictures. The last page of the notebook, way down at the bottom, he references the reader, and could this possibly be for Dr. Fenton? classicjimbo.squarespace.com. Now, he never ends up uploading these pictures to it, but this is where his head was when he was thinking about being remembered. And for a guy that wants to be wanted, for a guy that wants to be remembered, for a guy who is willing to kill to increase how he feels about himself, it's paid off for him. Because all that attention that he sought before the murders, it's all coming to him now. This is success. This is his payoff for murdering people. And he knew it was wrong on every single level except the one he cared about the most, and that was himself. But I'm not asking you to remember this. I'm asking you to remember this. On July 19th and 20th, 2012, this guy right here, with hatred in his heart, and it is in everything that he has written before he goes to jail. In fact, he tells Woodcock, I hate everybody. With hatred in his heart and the belief that he would value himself more based on how many people he killed, knowing full well not another person on the planet Earth would buy into this abstract, theoretical, the words he used with Dr. Reed, theory. He armed himself to the teeth over 2.5 months, thought of every contingency, even plotted potentially getting away, went in there and just killed people left and right, and kept pulling the trigger and only stopped when the gun stopped. Thank you. Go back and talk about the things that were raised here. Do it. But when you consider this guy's capacity to know right from wrong, it's not the diagnosis. It's not November 2012. It's not a non-diagnostic MRI from a couple months ago. It's not the expert opinions of two people who are neither forensically trained nor did they invest the time and effort into getting this thing right. At the end of the day, even without the mental health experts, you know that he knew what he was doing was right and wrong. Not guilty by reason of insanity is saved for people that don't know they're around people, let alone killing people. They're reserved.
Section, that's a misstatement of the law, Your Honor.
Why don't you rephrase, Mr. Brooklyn? I'll sustain the objection. Rephrase.
Thank you. This is argument, right? When you read those instructions on not guilty by reason of insanity, it's not intended for some nuanced viewing of is it possible that he only thought it was illegal but really believed. That's not what that instruction's about. We know what insanity is based on the words in those instructions. This ain't it. He knew what he was doing when he killed those people. He intended to kill them. That was his specific goal. And when he went in there, and by the way, he didn't have to intend a specific individual. He intended to kill each of them. And when he went in there, didn't care how many he killed, didn't care who he killed. It was just about killing. grave danger, extreme indifference to the value of human life. This guy gets held accountable. That's what the evidence says. Not because I say it, because that's what the evidence says. And so do two court-appointed, state mental hospital-picked doctors who this is what they do. And they both say the exact same thing. Sane. 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 Guilty. Thank you.
All right, members of the jury, this is the time in the proceedings when I have to announce to you who the deliberating jurors are and who the alternate jurors are. I want to remind you that this is not based on trial performance and that the attorneys and I had selected some seat numbers way in advance of the trial, and that's how we decided who the alternate jurors are and who the deliberating jurors are. Just to make sure we're all on the same page, and because we're not using names, I'm going to ask you to stand up when I mention your seat number and juror number, all right? And first I'm going to read the deliberating jurors. So the 12 deliberating jurors are as follows. Seat number 1, juror 640. Seat number 2, juror 17. Seat number 3, juror 329. Seat number 5, juror 535. Seat number 6, juror 87. Seat number 11, juror 118. Seat number 13, juror 378. Seat number 14, juror 155. Seat number 15, juror 527. Seat number 17, but temporarily sitting in seat number 18, juror 737. Seat 21, juror 557. And seat 23, juror 311. All right, these, everybody who stood up are the folks who are the deliberating jurors, and that matches my list. All right, I'll have everyone sit. Thank you. The alternate jurors are the juror sitting in seat number 4, that's juror 661. And you don't have to stand as long as you're acknowledging that you know that's you, and seat number, and juror 661 has acknowledged that. The juror sitting in seat number 10, juror 1009, and she's acknowledging me as well. The juror in seat number 12, that's juror 983, he's acknowledging me. The juror in seat number 16, juror 673, she's acknowledging me. The juror sitting in seat number 18, but temporarily sitting in seat number 17, that's juror 706, she's acknowledging me. Seat number 22, that's juror number 307, and she's acknowledging me. And finally, seat 24, juror number 313, and he's acknowledging me. All right. Now, I just have a few more remarks before I let you go home for the evening. First of all, alternates should not feel like this has been a waste of time for you. We could not have done this without you. That's number one. Number two, we may still need you, so you need to continue to follow my admonishments. For example, if one of the deliberating jurors becomes unavailable during deliberations, it's possible that that we would need you. So you need to continue to abide by all my admonishments, please. As far as each alternate knows, he or she may be next in line. You don't know who's next in line, but one of you is next in line, and I can tell you that we've already used more than one alternate juror. So for those of you who are alternates, you need to continue to comply with all my admonishments and all my instructions. The alternates must leave their notebooks and copies of their instructions either in your locker or in one of the two smaller jury rooms that you've been using. Because those two are not going to be used by the deliberating jurors. So as long as you don't leave your notebook and the copy of the jury instructions in the 201 jury room, then that should be okay, and my staff will assist you. Please do not take your notebooks or your copies of the instructions with you either home or anywhere outside the courthouse, certainly do not take them to the room where you're going to be staying while the deliberating jurors are deliberating. To make it easy on everyone, let's just plan to have everyone here at 9 tomorrow. Is that okay with everyone? That it's late tonight, this gives you a chance to sleep in a little bit. So let's have the deliberating jurors show up. You will show up the same as usual, and you will be using the 201 jury room. That's the jury room behind me. The alternates will show up in a different place, and my staff will give you instructions about that tonight, and they'll tell you where to park. You'll park in a different place, and then you'll be staying in a different room. You may want to bring appropriate books and games, puzzles to keep yourself busy while you wait for the deliberating jurors. As I indicated to you the other day, this is not my doing. The law requires me to keep you here, you alternates, while the deliberating jurors are deliberating. We will have lunch brought in for you, just as we will do with the deliberating jurors. For tomorrow, let's have everyone here at 9, as I said. And then from there on out, if the deliberating jurors come back to deliberate the next day, then you can select the time when you want to come back. And it's up to you as to what time you select, as long as you all agree upon it, and as long as you communicate that to my staff so that we can coordinate with the alternates and let the alternates know what time to be here the next day. All right? Does that make sense to everyone? In terms of how late you can stay here every day, the courthouse closes at 5:30, as I said. So, and you all have to agree, when I say all of you, I'm talking about the deliberating jurors, as to the time of day when you want to go home, and then communicate that to us so that we can coordinate it with the alternate jurors. Please keep in mind what I've mentioned before, that once you reach your verdicts, I will need to have you wait 3 hours before I can announce the verdicts here in the courtroom, to allow everyone a chance to get here. So keep that in mind. That's for the deliberating jurors. But again, we'll have to coordinate. My staff will coordinate with the alternate jurors. All of the admitted exhibits, with the exception of live ammunition, will be sent back to the jury room back here for courtroom 201 for deliberations. You've seen most of the admitted exhibits, but I've been telling you throughout that you would have an opportunity to see anything again that you wanted to, and so we will have all of the admitted exhibits sent back to you for deliberations in case you want to see anything else, or see something that you haven't seen yet, or see something again that you've already seen. That's entirely up to you. We will provide gloves for you in case you want to use gloves. Keep in mind that the exhibits that were marked and rejected by the court are not part of the evidence and will not be sent back to the jury room. The exhibits that go back to the jury room are only the exhibits that were actually admitted into evidence. And there were some, by the way, that were marked as exhibits with exhibit numbers or letters, but they were not offered into evidence. And so the same ruling or the same thing applies to those. If they were not offered, even if I did not reject them, they just weren't offered into evidence, and those do not go back to the jury room for deliberations. I want to remind you that there are a couple of you who are unavailable on Friday, July 17th. That's Friday of this week. So we have to take Friday of this week off. So if there's no verdict at the end of Thursday, we'll just plan to have everyone return on Monday, July 20. When you go home, this is for the deliberating jurors, when you go home at the end of the day, all the admonishments that are contained in instruction number 1 that I read to you today, those all apply to you. When you go home at the end of the day, after a day of deliberations, I'm not going to bring you in here to remind you about those admonishments. I am trusting that you will comply with all those admonishments. And they're a little different than what the admonishments were before, because before you were not permitted to deliberate. Now you are permitted to deliberate, but I remind you that you can only deliberate when you're all together, all 12 of you, and only when you're in the jury room. So you can't go home and deliberate on your own individually, and if someone steps away, say, to go for a smoke, you can't continue to deliberate. You have to wait till all 12 of you are present, and you have to wait till you are in the jury room. Now, you can deliberate during lunch if you wish, because we're going to have lunch brought to you. So that's not a problem. Again, as long as you're in the jury room and as long as all 12 of you are present. But it's a good idea to review my admonitions in that instruction number 1 that I gave you earlier today for all deliberating jurors, because those are the admonitions that will apply to you as long as you're deliberating. In terms of the alternates, with respect to you, the admonishments are a little bit different because you're not allowed to deliberate. And so let me go through them, and we will also have them in the room where you're going to be staying. There's going to be a blow-up containing all these advisements, but let me just run through them real quick just to make sure the alternates understand that these are the advisements that apply. Number 1, please do not discuss any aspect of the case with each other through any means. You're free to talk with each other, but not about the case. You're not allowed to deliberate in any way or discuss any aspect of the case. Number 2, in addition to not being able to discuss any aspect of the case with each other, you may not communicate about the case with anyone else through any means. All you can tell people is that you're a juror in a trial in Arapahoe County that is expected to end at the latest in August. Number 3, you may not have any contact or communications with any jurors who have been dismissed or with jurors who are deliberating. Number 4, please do not talk with any witnesses, parties, or attorneys about anything, whether related to the case or not. Number 5, to make sure that witnesses, parties, and attorneys do not talk to you, it is imperative that you wear your juror badge whenever you're on the courthouse premises and that it is visible to everyone around you. Your juror badge will also reduce the risk that people will talk about the case in your presence. If you hear anyone talking about the case, please remove yourself from that location. In the event that, despite your best efforts, you hear something about the case, please let my staff know that you want to talk to me. Number 6, please do not talk to any members of the media about anything until these proceedings are completed. Number 7, you must not read, view, or listen to any news or media reports that may refer to this case. Because there's media coverage of this trial, please be particularly vigilant while listening to the radio, watching TV, reading the newspaper, and using the internet or any electronic device. Number 8, you cannot visit any locations mentioned in the case, nor are you allowed to conduct your own investigation outside the courtroom. This includes consulting outside references in relation to the case. Number 9, all decisions in this trial must be based solely on the evidence presented in the courtroom and the instructions of law that I provide. And number 10, you cannot form any opinions about the case or deliberate internally, privately, about the case. You must resist any temptation to deliberate. One more thing for the deliberating jurors. In terms of deliberations, jurors sometimes want to know about time limitations. There are none. There's no minimum. There's no maximum. It's entirely up to you how long your deliberations take. Does everyone understand that? Everyone's saying yes and not in their head yes. At least the deliberating jurors are. Okay, in a moment, I'm going to give an oath to my bailiffs. And then after that, what we're going to do is we're going to have the alternates exit the courtroom first so that you can retrieve your things that you may have in the jury room here in 201. You should take out anything that you have in there. And my staff will escort you in there, and then also give you an opportunity to put your notebook and your copy of the instructions in a locker or in one of the other two in one of the other two jury rooms. You're not deliberating, all right? And then my staff will have further instructions for you, and will take you to the room where you're gonna, to the place where you're gonna show up tomorrow, and tell you about the room where you're gonna be staying. While the deliberating jurors are deliberating. Okay? All right, if I could have all the bailiffs, please, so that I can administer an oath. And Ms. Zagel's not here. When she's here tomorrow, I will administer the same oath to her tomorrow in private. All right, if I could have everyone raise your right hand for me, please. And there are 2 oaths. The first one is, do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of law that you will keep the deliberating jurors together as order, that you will not permit any person to speak to them, that you will not speak to them yourself unless by order of the court, or to ask them if they have agreed upon a verdict, and that when they have agreed upon their verdicts, that you will return with them into court. Please say I do. All right. The second oath is, do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of law that you will keep the alternate jurors together as order, that you will not permit any person to speak to them, and that you will separate them from the deliberating jurors and will keep them apart from the deliberating jurors until the deliberating jurors have reached their verdicts, and that when the deliberating jurors have agreed upon their verdicts, you will return with the alternate jurors into court. Please say I do. All right. Thank you. All right. All right, folks, at this time, I'm going to ask the alternate jurors to step out of the courtroom, please, and then you can retrieve your things from the jury room that's behind the courtroom, the 201 jury room. Please be seated, everyone. We'll just wait a couple of minutes and give the alternate jurors a chance to get their things and to do the things that I mentioned. So if you want to just relax for a couple of minutes. One other thing that I want to remind you about is, in addition to the exhibits, we're going to send the original instructions, jury instructions to the jury room, to the deliberations room, so they'll be there tomorrow. And same thing with the original verdict forms. They'll be there by the time you're in that room tomorrow at 9, okay? And Ms. Robinson, if you could let me know, please, when it's okay to release the deliberating jurors, I will do that. Once I release you folks, this is for the deliberating jurors, my staff will have further instructions for you, but you'll be using the jury room for courtroom 201, which is behind the courtroom. But generally speaking, you will follow the same sorts of procedures that you've been following all along, even including your parking area and that kind of thing, okay? And like I said, for tomorrow, let's plan on having you here at about 9 o'clock in the morning. And then at some point, my staff will distribute some kind of menu so that you can select what you want for lunch. And we'll do the same thing with the alternate jurors separately. Would counsel please approach for just a moment? All right, Ms. Robinson, are you not yet? Okay. All right, folks, thank you for your patience. Hang in there. It's I know it's late, but I appreciate how patient you've been. It should just be another minute or so. Okay. Yes. All right, folks, I'm only going to keep you here another hour or so. All right, at this time, I'm going to go ahead and release you for the evening. Get some rest tonight. It's been a long day. It's almost 6:30. You got here before 9 this morning. You've been very patient throughout. Please make sure that you follow my advisements overnight. And the advisements are the ones that are in instruction number 1 that I gave you earlier today. Leave your things here, your notebooks and the instructions. You can't take them home. And that applies throughout. You have to leave your notebook and the copy of the instructions here. Certainly you can't take the original instructions or the original verdict forms out of the jury room. They have to stay in the jury room. But the same thing applies with respect to your notebooks and your copies of the instructions, all right? So you may be tempted when you get home to want to start deliberating about the case internally. You have to resist that temptation. You cannot do that. You can only deliberate when you're all 12 together and you're in the jury room, okay? Have a great evening, folks. I'll see you tomorrow. Well, I may not see you tomorrow. Have a great evening. Thank you. Please be seated, everyone. The record should reflect that all of the jurors have now exited the courtroom, and so we're outside the presence of both the deliberating jurors and the alternate jurors. In terms of counsel, what I would like is, number one, for you to leave good contact information with my staff in case we need to get a hold of you. And number two, I would like you to be available, if at all possible, within 15 minutes or so. I don't want to have to wait a long period of time in case, for example, there may be a question or something comes up with the jury. So if you can be available within about 15 minutes or so, I would appreciate that. Is that a problem for the people?
Do you need all of us available within 15 minutes or just one of us?
Just one of you. As long as you're comfortable proceeding with whoever's here, that I'm comfortable, so,
We can do that. I have one request, Your Honor.
yes.
Different judges do this differently. I think it works better this way. When and if there are juror questions that need to be assessed and answered, my request would be that when we get the phone call, that the court staff tell us what the jury question is. Some judges like to make us wait and not let us know until we get here, but it gives us time to think about it and maybe do some research and consider what our position's going to be.
My practice is not to tell you over the phone and to make you wait, and so that's what I'm going to do. And I'll tell you also that my practice is to have a proposed response by the time you get here. So that tends to, I find that if I can focus counsel, it helps. And I find that if we just start with an open discussion, then we can go in all kinds of different directions. So that's my practice, and that's the way I'll handle it, okay? So when you get here, and when we're ready to go, then we'll have a copy of the question for each of you. If you need time to think about it, I will give you that time. So I don't think it's fair to just surprise you and say, give me an answer now. If you get the question when I'm here and you say, Judge, we'd like some time to think about it and think about the proposed response, then I'll give you that time. I'll give you as much time as you need, okay? So
Okay, Your Honor, it's your courtroom.
it is. Mr. King, does it work for the defense to be available within about a 15-minute time frame?
May I show up in my pajamas?
You can show up however you want, as long as you show up.
Yeah.
Or somebody shows up. It doesn't have to be all of you, but somebody that you're comfortable having here. Of course, your client has to be here as well, but the sheriffs will take care of that.
That's fine, Judge.
Okay. All right. Is there anything else at this time on behalf of the people?
Your Honor, when the jurors leave for the end of the day, would the court let us know so that we know we're free to leave too?
So you know you're free to breathe? Yes. I will have my staff contact you and let you know when the deliberating jurors have gone home for the day. And that will be for both sides, obviously. Is there anything on behalf of the defense that we need to talk about at this time?
I just have one request for the court regarding the PowerPoint presentations that were used actually during closing arguments as well as opening statements, because I don't think that we did this for the openings, although I may not be remembering. But I would ask the court to order both parties to put the PowerPoint presentations that they used on CDs and submit them as court exhibits so that they've been made a part of the record for appellate purposes. I don't recall whether there were any objections that resulted in any alterations of the PowerPoints used during opening. Today, of course, there were, and so my request would be that the prosecution submit at least the thumbnail of the original, a copy of the thumbnails that the court used to make its rulings earlier, as well as the actual PowerPoint presentation that was used during closing. And my request would be that it be placed on CD so that we actually have the video and all of the moving parts of the PowerPoint properly in the record.
Do the people have any objection to that?
We were changing things on the fly. I'm pretty sure we can do that. If we can't, we'll let you know, Your Honor.
Okay, great. All right, that request is granted. Anything else? No? All right, get some rest. Thank you. The court will be in recess.
This is it. Yeah. You took the chairs out, this actually goes on top of the chairs, the black thing goes.